Thank you for joining me on this edition of the program. I am Mary Kanu. West African military chiefs are in Accra, the capital of Ghana, to coordinate a possible intervention aimed at reversing Niger's coup. The two-day meeting comes after fresh violence in the insurgent-hit country, with jihadists killing at least 17 soldiers in an ambush. 20 more soldiers were wounded, 6 seriously, in the heaviest losses since the July 26 coup. But talks also come amid disagreement between African countries about the idea of foreign military action after ECOWAS had said it would prepare a standby force to restore order in Niger. President Bola Tinubu had on Tuesday said the biting sanctions imposed by the economic community of West African states on the Niger junta would not be lifted despite the military leader's promise to negotiate with the regional bloc to resolve the crisis in the Francophone country. The president spoke when he received the special envoy of President Ali Bongo Ondimba and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Gabon, Herman Imagold, at the State House in Abuja. President Tinubu reinforced the position of the regional body not to accept any attempt by the military junta in Niger to intimidate and harass President Mohamed Bazoum. He also praised the solidarity of the economic community of Central African states on the political impasse. In his remarks, the special envoy commended the leadership of ECOWAS and President Tinubu for the steps taken so far to restore democracy in Niger, adding that President Bongo and ECOWAS fully support all ECOWAS resolutions. Well, to speak more on this development, I'm joined on the program by international relations and security analyst Fidel Owusu. It's good to have you join me on the program. Now, I must begin by asking, is a military intervention the solution to the crisis in Niger, or should the country be left alone to decide its form of governance?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to say that in conflicts like this or of this kind, you would have different solutions or different paths to finding a solution. We can have the diplomatic, the political, and as well as the military intervention kind of thing. And we still have sanctions, the use of sanctions as economic and political sanctions as one of the means to address issues like this. But in this case, immediately the events happened in the past couple of weeks, ECOWAS initiated an ultimatum. The ultimatum was a 7-day ultimatum to the junta to give up or to reinstate the deposed president. After 7 days, there has been no military intervention. However, during the course of the 7 days, ECOWAS sent a delegation of a former military leader of Nigeria and other leaders. But the response from the junta in Niamey was not very good. So now there is this kind of collision between the junta and the ECOWAS, because the junta from the beginning has shown that it is not willing to talk. And so the ECOWAS members really want to use force or want to put force strongly on the table as a viable option in reversing the situation in Niger.
Okay, so the economic community of Central African states has pledged solidarity and support for ECOWAS. So do you see this improving political dialogue and, prefer some kind of solutions in Niger?
Yeah, so dialogue is always the way to go, but dialogue, it takes two to dialogue or more to dialogue. But when the military is saying that it is not going to reverse the situation, it insists on being in control in Niamey and all over Niger, it is very difficult. Now, ECOWAS itself has some limitations. What are these limitations? These are, one, geography. Niger, despite its smaller population, is bigger than Nigeria in land size. It's far bigger than Nigeria. And in fact, in ECOWAS West Africa, Niger is the largest state in ECOWAS West Africa. So unlike in Gambia in 2017, when ECOWAS moved in to depose a leader who had lost election and was refusing to leave, Niger is a bigger country because Gambia is a very small place, but Niger is bigger. Again, the ethnic dimension in Niger, if you look at the southern half of Niger, is dominated by the Hausa. And the Hausa are also a majority group in northern Nigeria. So any conflict in Niger can also have this kind of rippling effect, or can spill over into northern Nigeria. Already we know that northern Nigeria is facing a lot of insurgency, banditry, and all kinds of things happening in northern Nigeria. This can result in something devastating, and these are some of the limitations. Again, logistically, is ECOWAS ready to support this force? When you talk of economy, Ghana's economy is now suffering because Ghana has subscribed to an IMF package. Is Ghana having that kind of money to sponsor this military intervention? So these are some of the limitations. However, ECOWAS believes that it is not going to allow coups to be the order of the day. There has been coup in Guinea, there has been coup in Mali, and there is military regime in Burkina Faso. The Nigerian one is a fourth, and ECOWAS is bent on stopping it, because after the end of the Cold War in the early 90s, the region has moved towards democracy and civilian governance, and the reversal thereof is not really speaking well of the region, and so they are very determined to reverse the situation. So there are pros and cons to this particular situation.
Well, but do you think the failure of regional organizations such as ECOWAS and also the African Union to take a firm stance against military power seizures in Guinea, Burkina Faso and Mali have somehow emboldened the Nigerian military?
Yeah. Now, there is, yesterday, there was a meeting between AU and ECOWAS officials, and there was massive disagreements. AU is insisting that the use of military intervention should not be an option. But ECOWAS insists that without that, they are going to have reversal of democratic gains over the last decades. So already AU, especially Southern Africa and Northern African states like Algeria, vehemently object to any invasion of Niger. But the ball is in ECOWAS courts, because the coups are happening in ECOWAS countries. Guinea is in ECOWAS, Mali, Burkina Faso are all in ECOWAS. Again, this junta have promised to support Niger and have said that any declaration or any intervention is a declaration of war on their own states. And already we know that Niger shares direct borders with, or boundaries with, Mali and Burkina Faso. So troops moving into Niger to support the junta against ECOWAS is a possibility. Even though we don't see the viability, it is a possibility. And so if you look at all these things, there is no unanimity. There's no homogeneity in where to go. Some want to go, others do not. But in the case of West Africa, countries that are now sharing border with junta-ruled countries or military governments are getting scared, or they are getting a little unsettled, and so want these coups to stop. So the interest of AU and that of ECOWAS would be vastly different, even though ECOWAS is actually a subsection of the United African Union.
Okay, so there had been a lot of emphasis on ethnic military composition of the country and also of ousted President Bazoum, who is of Arab descent. Could this have a contributing factor?
Yes, I have I've written some pieces on this particular subject. Many Africans feel that when you talk about this, you are exposing the continent, but then we speak to facts. We, as analysts, we are supposed to let people know what is happening and not what ought to happen or what is supposed to happen and all that. We say what is happening. In fact, Bazoum is from a Difa, the Difa, that is the name of his tribe, and they are found in southeastern Niger, closer to where Boko Haram and ISIS in West Africa are operating. Now, this southeastern part of Niger is also a very restive area, as I've mentioned. Now, from a minority group, he was able to climb up to become president. Now, if you look at the bigger picture, this is very good for minority groups across Africa, because in many African states, if you are from a minority group, you could never become president through any elections. So for a minority, someone from a minority to rise to that level, it was a plus to democracy in Niger and that in Africa. So his deposition or his removal actually brings to bear the fact that majority ethnicities are still having so much say in what happens in their country. And the coup leader being from the Hausa group doesn't spell well, because there are times that Hausas have been in charge of Niger. So a minority person being there and he being removed brings to fore the sensitivity of ethnocentrism and other issues of the sort. And this cannot be overlooked. In case of any intervention, I don't think that the Hausa kinsmen of General Tiani are going to sit down and watch. They are definitely going to take arms. And already we are picking intelligence that some youth are offering themselves to take arms and defend the junta, and which is very unfortunate for Africa.
Well, we'll have to take a short break now. So let's take a break. But when we return, the program will continue. Stay with us. Welcome back. On this edition of the program, we're speaking to an international relations and security analyst, Fidel Owusu, on the resulting effects of the coup in Niger, especially as ECOWAS now has the backing of the Economic Community of Central African States. Now, Fidel, the discussions in Accra by the military chiefs will focus on the resources, the number of troops needed, and a standard operating procedure for combat troops. So, are we looking at a full-blown war, or do you see it as a mere threat by ECOWAS to force the hands of the junta?
Yeah, first of all, why Accra? Accra is very, very important when it comes to West Africa, because in the past, Accra has become center of diplomacy. In fact, during the Nigerian Civil War in the 1960s, there were some peace deals that were signed closer to Accra in Peduasi in Accra. The Liberian War, Sierra Leonean War, and all civil wars in West Africa have had Accra playing important role in terms of diplomacy. Now, when this started, because Nigeria currently holds the chairmanship of ECOWAS, most of the summit or meetings in reaction to this coup were held in Abuja. But currently, it has shifted to Accra. Why? Ghana carries a lot of diplomatic weight. Nigeria doesn't want to come across as using its leading role in the West African region to bully others. So the meeting coming to Accra itself is symbolic and diplomatically significant. Now the generals are meeting in Accra. The whole thing is that in terms of the location of Ghana, logistics, the role Ghana military has played in international peacekeeping and other, Ghana has that credibility. And so this meeting, apart from its symbolism, would also send a clear message to the junta that ECOWAS is not a toothless bulldog. It can make do of what it is saying. It could put real and hard decisions on the ground and make sure that they are enforced. Because after the ultimatum, ECOWAS came across as an organization that was just bragging or bluffing around. And I think that the military had endeavored to call the bluff of ECOWAS. But with the Accra meeting and the location of the meeting itself will show that ECOWAS is taking this thing a step further. And so this logistics and other things that would be discussed would mean that anything could happen. An intervention is not technically a war, but all interventions have resulted, or most interventions have resulted in wars. And so if there's going to be an intervention, then definitely there's going to be some exchange of fire. Unless the junta says that, well, in the case of Gambia, where the leader who was refusing to leave later had to acquiesce and abdicate his position, if the junta decides to do same, then there's not going to be any skirmishes or any bloodletting or anything that Africans do not want. But if it insists, then I'm afraid ECOWAS going in there will not be peaceful.
Well, you're speaking about the power ECOWAS wields, but we know that Ghana and Nigeria led previous interventions under the umbrella of the ECOWAS ceasefire monetary group, that is ECOMOG in Liberia and Sierra Leone in the 1990s. So in a situation where, say, force is used and the military retains power, what does this mean for Africa?
Maybe you have to come again. That the military
in a case where force is used by ECOWAS and still the military retains power, the military junta retains power, what does this mean for Africa?
Well, mostly if you are going to look at the resume of ECOWAS, then it means they have a chance of succeeding. Because in the past event that we've mentioned, they succeeded. ECOWAS succeeded. In fact, even in Cote d'Ivoire, when Gbagbo was not living, ECOWAS had actually supported the removal of Gbagbo, and they succeeded. Amid some intervention of some foreign nations, which was not really welcome. But in all these cases that we've mentioned, ECOWAS has succeeded. So in terms of comparative advantage, ECOWAS has the advantage because there are so many countries that share border with Niger that are not in support of the coup. And the most important of which is Nigeria. Nigeria has a long northern border with Niger. And so forces in Nigeria entering Niger is not going to be something so cumbersome in terms of access. But as in, after you've gotten there, the kind of guerrilla tactics or the kind of war that you face is what often bogs invading forces down. But if it happens that the military, after an intervention, the military is still strong and stays on, then it means that the militaries across the sub-region are going to be strengthened, empowered, and they can go on and on to take power from civilian governments and halt and quench democratic gains in the sub-region.
So what then does the military takeover in Niger mean for democracy in Africa?
Yeah, so after the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, and afterwards, when the Soviet Union collapsed, many countries in West Africa, it started with Benin. Republic of Benin was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to move from military rule to civilian rule when the Soviet Union collapsed. At the time, in the 1990, Benin started, then Ghana followed. Now, by 1992, Ghana had installed a civilian leader after 11 years of military rule. It took Nigeria another 6 years in 1999 to start democratically. Now, after these gains, Nigeria has changed several leaders. Ghana has changed several leaders. Benin, same. And some countries are doing very well. There are some civilian government that are still entrenched. I mean, they are not really living, but it's still civilian government. Now, with the current string of coups, these gains over the last 30 years are eroding at a faster pace. And now, every country in West Africa, ECOWAS West Africa, except the Gambia and Cape Verde, shares border with a military-ruled country. And you know, coups are contagious. Like I've always said in my pieces and my articles, coups are very contagious. They are like measles or any pandemic that you can think of. When it happens, it attracts attention and it could happen in the neighboring states. And so far, if you check from Guinea in the west up to Niger, it is a continuous or contiguous territory. You can drive all the way from Guinea without passing and then pass through Mali, Burkina Faso, and then to Niger without passing through any other country, which means they are strengthened and they can really share resources and they can really expand their influence. So this particular coup number of coups that are happening are actually reversing the democratic gains, the kind of freedom of speech that now ECOWAS members states have within, the kind of progress that some countries are making. In fact, the democracy is not perfect. Some leaders are being excessively corrupt. Others are abusing power in democratic states. However, from our experience in the 80s and the 70s, when the military were dominating in West Africa, you realize that comparatively, a bad democracy is better than the best military regimes you can have, because you have the freedom to express yourself. When the leader is being corrupt and the youth and other people are ready to vote them out, they can. And even when they steal elections, there is still the case of going to court, and anything can happen from there. So this has really sent a shockwave through the region.
Well, all right. So just as we were speaking, there's a new development out of Niger. ECOWAS has begun activation of standby force in Niger. So what are your thoughts on this latest development?
Yes, that is anticipated. You don't go for you don't meet in Abuja and go on to meet in Accra and do nothing. You have to do something, because if you don't do it, then you are taken for granted. Then you are seen as someone who does not have any teeth to bite. So with the standby forces, at the initial stage, there will be so much space within Niger for any standby force to start, to start operating. However, the crust of the issue, or the result to be seen in the long term, is the junta going to stay in Niamey, or they are going to withdraw or retreat to other places and use guerrilla tactics against ECOWAS forces. You remember very well when the US invaded Iraq in 2003. Within months, George Bush had declared mission accomplished in San Diego. He mounted some ship. They put a ban, mission accomplished in Iraq. We finished Saddam. In a couple of years, that was actually the beginning of the war, when US soldiers were put in boxes and sent home because of suicide bombing. So wars are very complex. In the beginning, you can have an advantage, but over time, when people decide to engage in guerrilla tactics and other tactics, it can really become costly and lose, and a lot of human lives could be lost as a result.
All right. Let me ask you this final question before I let you go. Do you somehow see the rise of xenophobic attacks, on Nigerians living in Niger?
Currently or eventually?
Whether currently or eventually, do you somehow see this happening?
Yeah. Well, as I said, most of the Nigerians who are in Niger share ethnicity with the Nigerians, the Hausa. And so definitely Nigerians will find solace among them, their family. It's only a colonial division that divided those families or those ties. Except maybe you are from another tribe in southern Nigeria, where maybe if you are not, or you are being too open, it can cause a problem, or you are taking sides, it can cause a problem. But if a Yoruba person can speak Hausa, he's good to live in Niger without any xenophobic attacks, and vice versa. In fact, when it comes to West Africa, Hausa is a lingua franca. It's spoken everywhere, almost everywhere. You come to Ghana, as I step out in Accra, I hear people speak Hausa. And so, in fact, we are one people. So I don't see xenophobic attacks, the kind we see in South Africa and other places. However, I think that if you are going to hoist Nigerian flags and perhaps provoke the people, you are not going to have it that easy. So if you are a Nigerian who finds himself in Niger, you should just tone down and then, mix up with the local people and find a safe place to be if danger is approaching. That's what I can say about that.
All right, now, international relations and security analyst Fidel Owusu, thank you very much for your time and your contribution.
You're welcome.
So that's our program this week. Thank you very much for watching. I am Mary Kanu.